Thank you, world, for coming to visit with us today. And without further ado, you have a nice drink, take a Strepsil and let's go.
Thanks very much. I know you've all seen the trigger warning. It's not only because of the content, but I've got COVID at the moment. I've not got much of a voice. My brain has escaped me, and it's affected my eyesight, so I can't really read very successfully. So apart from that, the other thing is I'm at the end of my garden in my office and I'm not down in my studio, which is where I was planning to be for this talk. So I'm not surrounded by any Ichabodies. I'm just here sort of sheltering from the storm, so to speak. So I build death dummies and I have been building them and teaching with them for the last 12 years or so. I started off with one, and this is the first one, Ichabod Smith himself, but he now has a growing family, and he is the most geriatric member of that family. I think his paperwork says he's over 100 years old, and there are preterm tiny weenies, there's a baby, and also various members of his family that you will meet in the photos here. So how on earth did it start? Well, I've been in and around death for 33 years now. And that all started by mistake when my mother died. So that's a whole other um, adventure story, really. But back in 2012, I was asked by a company called Green Fuse, who are down in Devon, to teach a hair and makeup course for people who wanted to start being funeral directors. So there were people that wanted to explore how to become funeral directors. And if you look at me, I mean, I know I've just come out of 4 days in bed, but I don't really do hair and makeup, except if, um, as a qualified embalmer who specialized in reconstructive embalming, if I was rebuilding somebody after an accident, obviously makeup might be quite considerable to hide some of the effects. And also, if somebody handed me a photo of a relative and said, "Look, this is my aunt's makeup bag. This is a photo of her. Can you do your best?" Then obviously, that's you know that's makeup. But I realised very soon into my first half-day course down in Devon with Green Fuse that these people really needed to understand a little bit more about the logistics of looking after somebody after they died. So I brought my experience into play and wondered what I could do about it. And yes, I did have very, very many questions. One of the questions that you might not be aware of, depending on where in the world you're watching this from, is that in the UK, you do not have to have any qualifications to be a funeral director. There aren't mandatory qualifications and there isn't licensing. So basically, anybody can open a funeral director's premises um, and get on with it. Um, and we've found over the last 30 years that the landscape of funerals in the UK has changed for the better, predominantly because of the green, eco, and alternative funeral directing companies that have sprung up and flourished. But I thought very early on that there was a gap in knowledge, and I wondered whether I could help with this gap. So I thought about best practice and some of the things that may be important. And I've always, in my career, I've always wondered why there were so many gaps between all the different professions that look after people before death and at death and after death. There's often so much of a gap, and people don't really know what the others do. And I've always wanted to build the bridges. I've always looked at possibilities for doing this and communications and trying to get people together rather than working in opposition to each other. And I guess being very neurodiverse, the whole aspect of thinking outside the box, thinking outside the coffin has just been the way that I work. So I started looking at ways in which I could help, knowing from my years of experience that there's a lot more involved in looking after a body than maybe somebody who's died in bed at home safely with family and friends all round. And it might present as a fairly uncomplicated person to look after. So could I bridge some of those gaps? And I had thoughts that I'd use a low tech simulation in conjunction with my skills and as an artist. And I wanted to start at looking at what was available. And so I started looking at dummies, and these chaps are, they're okay. They do what it says on the tin, but they don't really inspire me with an awful lot of confidence as to personalities. They look as though they came out of the same baked bean tin. These ones are used by first responders, and they're extremely useful for purpose, especially the bariatric one. Um, but they're built to be fairly robust and to go out on deployment training fairly regularly. And again, they don't really have an awful lot more personality that than that which can be put on by giving them something extra to wear. And these ones again, this the body sizings and different ages that they represent are quite useful. But again, I wasn't unduly inspired. But then you get to the sort of gold standard. This company is based in the USA, and they make really amazing dummies, not only for mortuary training, but for all kinds of aspects of training. And I did press the button that said add to quote, and I got a quote. And bearing in mind that I was asking, what, 12 years ago, um, I think I was quoted around about $45,000, and that was not including bringing it over here. Um, I may have got that slightly wrong, so I apologize to the company if I did get that wrong, but that was the number that's stuck in my dyspraxic mind. I had a budget of about £5.50, so I had to say no to that quote. And obviously, with what I wanted to do, that the circumstances I was in, and where I wanted to teach and everything, it had implications, and I had to make choices that were within my limitations, and I had to really weigh up the consequences for best practice training that I was trying to achieve. So I thought, what if I could build a body? What would it need to be like? Well, I started off with the back of an envelope and started drawing wooden frameworks. And then I thought, no, actually, if I want it to be articulated, I'd be better off with a skeleton. What does this body need to have really? Well, it needs to have a personality. It needs to be relationable. if not to real people, then it has to be relationable to its relations. You have to be able to build a grief scenario or a situational scenario around this body. It can't just be um, a sort of generic plastic body that looks like all the others. And I wanted the body to be problematic. Now, the problems that you get with looking after bodies are multiple, really, but they can relate to decomposition and fluid escape. So I wanted my body to have the possibility to teach people about purging. I wanted um, urine, poo, smell, and weight to be involved as well. I wanted to add to my 5 Ps, my purge, pee, poo, pong, and pounds. I wanted to add the possibility of catheters, stoma bags, stomach tubes, IV lines, pacemakers, um, and skin problems to come into that. So I gave myself a fairly tough um, sort of schedule, really, a building spec. So the answer came in a box from Amazon, bless them. And here's Ichabod when he first jumped out of his box. So that's where I start. And with all the adult dummies that I make, I start with a basic, not quite the very basic, but a plastic skeleton. And thanks to a day's course in Brighton with the most amazing um, anatomical sculptor, Eleanor Crook, who some of you may have heard of, I knew that I had the confidence to just build a basic face onto my skeleton. So I was extremely grateful for that experience I had with Eleanor. And if any of you are interested in anatomical art, she is one to look up. So this was Ichabod when he was first sculpted. What I really liked about this was that I was able to give him some before and after pictures. So he's definitely very animated, alive, quirky looking. He's sitting there with his 2 different color eyes. And that's a characteristic of all the Ichabodies. I just happen to have 2 different color glass eyes, so he got those, and all the other Ichabodies have got different color eyes as well. It's just one of those little things that not many people know about, except for the person that builds the eyes for me. So here he is after um, I say sort of jokingly that I had to kill him. So this was him after he died. And I had at this stage started punching his very characteristic hairs in. So you can see that he only has one set of eyebrows. And this is how it goes, one hair at a time. And here's some more body hair going in, and you can see the characteristic patch of green over his cecum, the start of decomposition. So I was able to start thinking about how I would demonstrate the beginnings of um, the natural deterioration that happens after death. So here he is, and these were the days before I had a studio. So his build started in the back garden. Luckily, it was a nice summer, and I did a lot of work on the sitting room floor. And my spouse is now much happier that I am able to have a separate studio. So when Ichabod had been built, this was his first foray down to green fuse with the first group of of students, and it was really interesting watching them relate to him and listening to them talking to him as they were caring for him. And it's one of the things I've, years and years and years of looking after countless people who had died. Um, I'm definitely one of the people that just chats away to the people that I look after. Um, and it's lovely that, for me, I produced a dummy that people were naturally um, chatting to. So I was really, really pleased about that. You can see the picture on the right-hand side. He's got his catheter and catheter bag. He's got drug lines in that you can just see drug lines on his right arm, and he's got a stoma bag as well. So I was able to just introduce various aspects of care um, to those students. So I was quite pleased with his first set forth into the world. Um, Here he is at work again. This was a death awareness day in a town about 30 odd miles away from where I live. And Claire Turnham, who runs Only with Love, a marvelous death care organization, um, she was doing a demonstration of shroud wrapping, and Ichabod decided that he'd like to volunteer for that. So she made him look really beautiful and comfortable. And here we are in Bristol at the opening of another new funeral business, Divine Ceremony. It's an incredibly they Dee has advanced this business so far now, but the opening was really, really exciting, positive, optimistic day, and to have been involved, just being there was absolutely wonderful. I have to say that wheeling him from the car to the venue, um, somebody shouted from the other side of the road and pointed and said, "That's Ichabod." And so we were laughing away that he was being recognised. So that's always nice. And I think yeah, I always talk for him because that's kind of what you do, isn't it, really? But I think he enjoyed trying out the coffins and just being there. And here he is with Charlie Cowling, who started the Good Funeral Guide and who wrote the Good Funeral Guide. And I think in the background there's a poster for the kind of shroud that was shown in a few slides back that um, Claire Turnham was demonstrating. And I wish I could remember what they are. That's very bad of me, and I'm sorry. Neurodiversity always hits at the worst time when you want to remember things and you can't. Ichabod likes to get out and about, and in the strength of trying to work out what everybody does when they work in and around death of any kind, he went and spent a day helping gas engineers pass their final exams. One of the most important things is that they need to know is how to enter and work in a property where people have been overcome by gas fumes. And so Ichabod and his granddaughter Jessica, who's lying down behind his chair, um, went and spent a day helping them. And I just sat around and drank tea, but I was very pleased to hear that everyone passed their exams, and they seemed to enjoy working with dummies who could describe situations that they needed to know about. We've worked around the UK with various different organisations that teach death doulas and soul midwives. And this photo is taken from one of those teaching sessions. You can see Ichabod wrapped up in his bed with his catheter, and he's purged slightly, bless him. But that's it's always a really nice thing to do, to be able to work with the whole spectrum of folks. So from traditional funeral directors, of which I've worked with, the alternative, eco, green funeral directors, and also the people that specialize in home dying and facilitating people to be at home when they die. So it's really nice to have that flexibility, and also have the professional knowledge to be able to work with the kind of full spectrum. I've also worked with individuals who've maybe got a family member who's been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and they want to look after them at home, and they just need to come and have some conversations and work out logistics, and just get support. So that's also being part of our work. So this is a little bit of a view of the expanding family. Ichabod's arm in the top left shows one of the drug lines and his hospital gown and uh, his wristband. In the middle picture, that's his daughter Monica, who's Jessica's mum. And um, Monica left home. She doesn't work with us anymore. She's gone away. So there you go. No more to be said about that. But I think I would like to be able to do some more work with a larger dummy. At the time that I made Monica, I didn't have the facilities to be able to literally to store that size dummy. And as you can see in the bottom photo, and the one of Ichabod and his wife Ichabel, um, they tended to kind of dominate the house, and um, we got to a stage where in the bottom picture, Ichabod and Jessica are sitting at the table with Icar, who is Ichabod's slightly younger brother. Um, Icar has a diabetic necrotic foot and an edematous leg, and he leaks quite substantially and also decomposes. And really, I think Icar was the final straw for my spouse when we discovered that he really was decomposing. And I had invented, I mean, to my knowledge, there might be decomposing dummies somewhere in the world, but I can only talk in my sort of sphere of knowledge. But yes, it became obvious that I needed to have some kind of a somewhere else to go. So I did have the opportunity to find a little studio. I'm not answering questions at the moment because I'm so neurodiverse. I go off on a tangent and you've had it. But how do I recreate decomposing bodies? Well, it's a bit of a trade secret, but yeah, I can and I do. Um, another area of work that I've been very, very proud to work in the last couple of years. So I started building two. Well, you can recognize Icar at the top with his hat, but I built the other two dummies at the end of last year for the Gyres Being Ready project. Gyres is a UK charity, gender identity research and education society. Um, and they asked me, in fact, they're commissioned dummies, and they're the only dummies I've made that aren't owned by me. So they are entirely Gyres property, but they're transgender dummies. But we were able, because we have the family, to create an individual set of care plans as a demonstration of what situation might be um, being faced by this particular family. So Vinica Trinica, who's the lady in the middle, is Icar's wife, and Mika is Icar's trans son by his first marriage. Um, and Mika has a sister who you'll meet in a bit, Vicky, who for the Being Ready project played the part of um, really the relative that was well enough to be quite involved in organising their funerals, and the cause of death, that the whole scenario was very, very carefully planned with advice from consultant um, palliative care specialists, and so we were able to do the most extraordinary training session, and it touched an awful lot of people. We went to various places all over the country, um, and we were able to teach groups of people that came from hospice staff, so consultants, doctors, um, and chief medical officers, hospice and hospital chaplains, nurses and GPs, social workers, coroner's officers, registrars, funeral arrangers, funeral directors, celebrants, ministers, cemetery and crematorium workers, and folk who actually worked for the funding organisations Marie Curie and Hospice UK. And the feedback was, it was overwhelming, actually, the feedback. And I can cry because it was just beautiful. And to be able to have um, individually made transgender dummies with family histories, with likes, dislikes, requests, as illustrations, it was the the it was humbling and extraordinary. And we met in the group of professionals that I've just read out. It was absolutely incredible. So they at the moment are sitting in my workshop, and you would have met them had I been down there, but I'm not. I'm here. COVID's going quite well at the moment. It's adrenaline. So at the moment, I'm also working with a company called Anubix Limited, and they run courses for post-mortem imaging. So teaching radiographers and radiologists about practical skills of working with people after death as opposed to scanning people who are alive. And obviously there are some quite interesting differences. One of my aspects of work, and my academic aspect, I got a master's in religion, the rhetoric and rituals of death, and I really have been studying coping strategies. And I started in a smaller way when I did my BA in death loss and palliative care. I was looking at coping strategies of people working in nursing homes, um, who were working with death. I think I perhaps forgot to say that it was about death, but I'm a deathy. So the coping strategies in that transition between working with live people and working with dead people is something that you can't really take for granted. And in all aspects of death care, we're all human beings, and we all respond, react, and deal with life in individual ways. And so we need to pay attention to what our minds, our bodies, and our spirits are telling us about how we respond to our work and how we look after ourselves. So it's one of the things that comes into the Dead Serious training. Anubix is an amazing company. The two joint CEOs are consultant radiologists, um, extraordinary young women, and I'm allowed to say extraordinary young women because I've just collected my bus pass, and we've got Lindsay Batty Smith down in the bottom left-hand corner, who's for decades has been doing post-mortem um, radiology and working sometimes alongside Professor Mark Viner. They've done bodies taken from major incidents, war zones, all kinds of places. And my co-tutor, Amy Lee Brooks, is a, a full-time post-mortem imager. And you know the team, I mean, with Raina as well, that the team actually covers so much experience of post-mortem imaging. I'm just the body person that builds dummies for them, you know, and I stand back in awe and listen to them talking not only about their work but in interpreting the bodies that they ask me to make. Now, the two specific bodies, although I think I went the first time I worked with the Nubix, I took 5 bodies with me, but the two that I built for them, one's a burnt body in the pugilist position, and I wanted a body that had been affected by fire to the extent that the limbs had gone into this position. It looks a bit like a boxer when everything shrinks down. And you can see in the picture of the burnt body in progress, so I hadn't finished doing the final layers of colouring. And then on the other side, there's a body in quite severe stage of decomposition with insect infestation and skin slip, and that body leaks and smells. So here's this is actually teaching with this body, and you can see that there might be some issues with positioning a body like that into the scanner and actually making sure that they go through the scanner aperture. So that was one of the reasons why I had to take some quite precise measurements. And I have to say that for the bodies that I make that are really complex, I read a lot of academic medical papers and anatomy books. I don't always just go with my own experience of looking after people after death, but I bring my experience into what I do. So, especially for the visceral nature of it, you can read about decomposition and how burnt bodies smell, but to have actually looked after people in those circumstances, you kind of know how you feel. Yeah, looking after people after death. It's very important. Not only looking after the people who've died, but looking after them for their families and looking after yourself as the carer of the person who has died. So these are some of the aspects that this particular body can help people think about. And yes, the odours. I have to bring the bodies back home from my workshop to do the final layers of odour construction each time I prepare them for going out to teach, because I don't want the whole building to complain about my being there. So I have to come back home. So my poor spouse knows that for those few days before going out to teach, I will be making smells. Some of the smells take weeks to prepare, and the garden shed is my place. And this is the decomp body, and you can see, if you look carefully, they're lying on a sheet which is absolutely soaking. Um, there is a very particular, very very astringent odor that goes with that, and that's trapped in a jar that is passed around the room. Obviously, training in a facility that is used for live people, you can't suddenly invade it with even a dummy that smells particularly unpleasant, because you don't want that smell to linger. It's not fair to the facility, and we'd never be invited back. This is somebody making a detailed inspection of the external aspects of the body. Um, they're not used, they're not scanned, should I say, because internally they're not going to be offering up very much information. But externally, I can produce situations on the surface that need to be inspected, looked at, discussed. Um, and even Ichabod was there. He now has a very big sacral pressure sore, so it's important that people learn that they need to turn bodies over, and just really pay attention to what's going on. This is a comment from Dr. Mark Viner. As I said, he is one of the people who has had huge experience over decades of working with decomposed bodies from war zones, and doing proper forensic important work to recover people so that they can be identified, and their remaining relatives can have some peace of mind to at least know that their bodies are being found. But yeah, and I think the spelling mistakes are probably mine. I apologize. But I was really interested in his response into my decomp smell, which is in the jam jar and the pot, because I wanted that smell to be authentic enough to be really visceral. It's important that people who are training don't just work with a dummy that looks, like some of the early dummies I showed you. You can have a dummy that looks as though they've got a sort of gory part, but we're creatures that have responses, and we need to work out, if we haven't had an experience, we need an ethical, safe space in order to explore what our responses and reactions are going to be. The last thing you want is your gag reflex to go off when you're actually in the field, or working with a group of coroners people, or wherever you happen to be, or if you're a sort of early days nurse, and you haven't come across the wound clinic. I think it was really, really useful for me to have Dr. Mark's feedback. And I hope you like the maggots. I made those. So here's Vicky Smith. I told you about her earlier. She's a very complex dummy that I made for hospice teaching. She's got a large fungating breast tumor. She's got secondaries in the jaw. She breathes through a trachea tube, and she's fed by a peg feeding tube. Obviously, her situation is very complex, and she can actually bring up all kinds of conversations about needs for her care as well as support for family and friends, how to deal with a large leaking wound. I'm not going to tell you what the odors are concocted from, and I'm glad you like the maggots. It's trade secrets, you know. So this is me. I didn't ask permission for use of this photo in this particular presentation, so I did take away the lovely faces, but you can see there's a dressing which is actually a dressing made by a company called Ekin, who operate in Ireland. They make the most extraordinary wound dressings, and they were very happy that I was wanting their dressings, and they sent me a nice box full. So shout out to them. Um, when I worked as an embalmer, I was always very happy if a family or a nursing home said, you know, here so and so's got a a precious sore. Here are the wound dressings that they had, because the prescription is just going to be thrown away. If you'd like to use it, then I could put a new dressing on the person that I was looking after, and maybe have some spares for somebody else. It's always useful to be able to have equipment that is fresh and can be used to contain things. I have more stoma bags than I think I probably ever need, but it's good. Um, I'm kind of on the outer limits of the Society for Simulation, which is an organization that's based in America. They have a wonderful code of ethics and values. I've been a member of the British Institute of Embalmers for 30 years this December, and their ethics and values I very much adhere to, even though I retired from practical embalming quite a long time ago. Um, Ethics, values, creating an ethical space for people to work in is really, really important to me. The only reason I'm really on the outskirts of the SOC sim is that I can't really work out how to use their website. Too dyspraxic, I think, but they're there. But over that period of time, the Ichabodies have grown as a family, but also the work has grown. The little poster that was on a notice board was in Scotland, so we've travelled the length and breadth of the UK. I was hugely honoured to have been nominated for the major contribution to the understanding of death in the Good Funeral Awards 2015. The prize was actually won by a very, very worthy person, but the nomination meant the world to me. It was really, really important. And we applied for a trademark for the Ichabodies. So they are the Ichabodies death dummies, and registered under two classes of you, there are marks that are, you know, it's all categories, and you have to apply for the category that you think that you fit into most. So we applied and we fitted into something. So it's the first time ever fitted into anything. Had a number of articles in the last couple of years. This is the FSJ, the Funeral Service Journal. So it's really nice to be able to spread the word about my work into the funeral profession. And this is a little film that was made by a friend's daughter who is doing a film degree in London at King's College. And the brief was to do a very short film that didn't have very much dialogue, that just sort of unfolded as it went along. So you can see a little bit about of where we should have been for this talk today. And also it starts being on an island. We're surrounded by water.
Sponsors get pulled finance from um, healthcare tuition around trans and education. It'd be interesting to see whether it affects anything. Or learners, or whatever you want to call it. She didn't die because she's trans. She died of something else. Because I think sometimes it's very easy to get the wrong impression. To be quite clear about what's going on. There has to be some kind of story with the cause of death, and it has to be a cause of death that didn't involve the coroner, obviously, because otherwise the scenario would be completely different. So she's heart failure. Ica in the name. So there's Icar, which is a bit short for Icarus, Ichabod, Jessica.
So you've had the how they began, and I don't know how long I've got left in my career. It depends on how the Ichabodies keep being asked to join in with things. We'll see. I'm not blowing the whistle on it yet, though. But if anybody's got any questions that I can answer now, if there's
A
time.
couple. Yes, there is time. It's 10 to 6. There were a couple of questions at the beginning when you were showing the molding of the face about what materials you were using. I don't know if that's a trade secret
Yeah,
because somebody
no,
was.
no. I generally use wax to mold the face, and then um, latex is usually the final skin. Um,
Mhm.
it's obviously, when I'm teaching in person, it's very important for me to find out that people aren't um, allergic to latex, and people can be quite sensitive to it. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because that there's a myth in certain of the funeral care, not only companies, but just sort of genres that have come about, that there's no there's no harm with a dead body, or a dead body can't give you anything. Everything dies when death dies. Um, you do have to learn about disease etiology a little bit, and how things are spread, and what stays in the body and what doesn't, and how long various different bacteria and viruses hang around after death. And so having a body that is potentially hazardous to some people just kind of reminds the whole class that you do have to take care of all different aspects, really.
Oh, that's very interesting. Nikki Varon is asking, I'm curious how or in what situation we might receive a deeply degraded body, as I'm assuming as a funeral director, as opposed to as somebody who retrieves people from war zones.
Yeah. I
Um,
think I think it depends entirely on where you are, because obviously I can't answer a question that is anywhere in the world. But if you're looking after somebody who's found dead after a long period of time, who has been looked after by His Majesty's coroner or the Procurator Fiscal in Scotland, um, who may have been dead for quite a long time before the body was found, or they might have been in a situation where they were held within the coroner's mortuary for a number of weeks or months because of ongoing um,
uh,
forensic, so, whatever. And also remember that people deteriorate at different rates according to what's going on with their bodies. So, for example, if somebody's been on um, quite long-term chemo treatment, or if they've been on steroids for quite some time, um, they might degrade much faster than somebody who has just sort of not been on those medicines. And if somebody's died and they're in a place where it's quite warm, um, so if they've died next to a central heating, a radiator, and flies have been in the room and they've been degraded by flies, and it depends on the body chemistry. We're all completely individual people, and even after death, we do things in different ways. Um, our personalities come out, and our life stories come out, and our bodies represent who we are at that moment. Um, and it's up to the pathologists and coroners to find out why we died, and what of, unless we're obviously under palliative care, and in which case our history is kind of known.
mhm. Nikki says that makes sense. Thank you. Jess has said, shout out to Bishop Angie's spouse. So please tell Kath we all appreciate what they put up with. Um,
Thank you.
shout out. Mhm.
She'll be really pleased to hear that.
That's awesome. So, I want to go back to what you just said about, for example, a body that might have been kept in by the coroner for a bit longer. Those refrigerated drawers that we see on telly, they can't keep you indefinitely. They're not cold enough.
They can put you in deep freeze. I actually came into the funeral business in 1991 when my mother died unexpectedly, and she was in the coroner's care for a month, and she was in deep freeze.
Mm,
When she came out, she was thawed out, and she was embalmed, but
mm,
in the UK, unlike in America, funeral directors have different education and qualifications to embalmers. And so the funeral director, who wasn't an embalmer, didn't realize the particular logistics that somebody who's deep frozen needs with their care. And so she came she was embalmed on a Friday. I got the phone call saying she was in her coffin on the Friday and looked beautiful. By Monday morning, she'd actually gone off.
Mm.
And that it was just one of those things. I should have been there on Friday evening. And I came into the funeral business because of my mother's funeral. I didn't leave after her funeral. I French polished her coffin. I put the handles on the coffin. I lined the inside and didn't leave. I looked after the coffin workshop for my first stint in the business. I then was transport manager. I then went to mortuary school and qualified as an embalmer. So when I say I've done everything, I have. And of course, I've arranged and conducted funerals, and I've also been a celebrant, whether it's a religious celebrant or a non-religious celebrant. So I've kind of done. But it was a gift from my mother, and I absolutely look upon it. It was incredibly traumatic, but it gave me the most phenomenal start, because coming in at the sharp end when you're dealing with, I mean, she was my only parent. I was 32. I'd never dealt with the death of anyone really before. Um, and okay, yes, it was traumatic. I was grieving. It was extraordinary, but it gave me a life. It gave me an
Yeah.
education. It gave me um, an outlook, an experience that I could take into the care of not only the people who died that I was looking after, but also the families. So yeah, incredibly honoured to be able to use that situation for the care of others.
It's 1 minute before we have to start putting people back into the waiting room. I didn't want to interrupt you during that because that is, I think, a really wonderful celebration of how we can get involved with death and find joy in it. And that's what we're all about in sharing with each other today. If you do go ahead and save the chat. And because you'll see how many people are resonating to what you said. The three dots at the top of the chat, you'll see, just save it. And a lot of people celebrating who you are, and thanking you for what you've done. And somebody saying like that we didn't hear about this in careers counseling. So it's very, very
I didn't
helpful.
either. I'm
No,
just
of
trying to
course.
work out how to save the chat.
So if you go to the meeting chat, it says Lifting the Lid International Festival, and there are three dots next to it. Can you see the chat? Click on the
And
chat.
now
There
I
it is,
can now
right? Three
save
dots.
chat.
There you go. Okay, now we're going to start putting people back into, obviously buy the merchandise, help us fund the thing, and thank you very much. And let's
Thank you
go
so
to
much.
Thank
talk to
you.